The judgment seat of Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And let me read verses 9 through 15 here because I want you to get the thought again. And we'll do a little bit of repetition of the review from last week. But listen to verse 9 and following. It says, "For we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building. According to the grace of God which is given unto me, as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another buildeth thereon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon." I emphasize that because that's what the judgment seat of Christ is going to reveal. How did we build upon the foundation of our salvation? Now go on to verse 11. "For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if any man build upon this foundation, gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest," or shall be revealed. "For the day of the judgment seat of Christ, shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is." I don't know about you, but that does something in my heart. That fears me. Have I built on the foundation where I will not be ashamed there? We'll talk about judgment here in just a moment, but this has nothing to do with the judgment of your sin. It has the judgment of your works and your service, building on the foundation of your salvation. Verse 14. "If any man's work abide, which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire." So we'll stop there for a moment, and let me give you a little bit of review of what we've already learned so far about this matter of the judgment seat of Christ and how it works, both the punishment for those that are lost and the punishment that they'll receive, and the rewards for those of us who are saved. And here's what we looked at. We looked at the degrees of punishment in hell at the great white throne judgment. And that's not the subject, but I want you to understand that there are degrees both in the punishment for those that go to hell, and there are degrees of rewards for those who have built properly on the right foundation. So here's what we got to be careful of. We got to be careful as Christians. Not the fact that we're afraid of going to hell, because we're not. We're saved. We're building on the foundation of Christ. But we need to understand this. Most people do not consider this. Most Christians sitting in our church, well, this place will fill up today, and most Christians that will come into our church today they don't have the knowledge, nor do they even give thought as to what kind of a lifestyle they're living, as to when they stand at the judgment seat of Christ, what's going to happen as far as the rewards or the loss of rewards. Most Christians don't even consider it. And we need to think about that, because I'm telling you now, every man is, every person born, every human that's saved is going to stand at the judgment seat of Christ. You have no choice about it. It's going to happen. It's going to happen immediately after the rapture. Okay. So the degree of suffering is what we're talking about. For those who were lost and went to hell, they will be resurrected, and we see that in Revelation chapter 20, 21, and so forth. And they're going to stand at that great white throne judgment. And you remember, the books were opened. God has recorded every single solitary thing a lost person has ever done that's been wicked. He has the books, and the books record. Every lost person has a book that God is writing down everything he's ever done, wickedly and everything. Now you and I, those books are not recording our works for sin, but God has taken account and record of what we're doing for him since we've been saved. And our names are not written in those books of sinful works. Our names are written in the book of life. So we're not going to be judged for our sin. In fact, it would be unjust for God to judge us for our sin, because Jesus was already judged once, and we don't need to be judged for it. So, sufferings will be according to all the account of each lost person. Now think with me on this, because all All who were ever influenced and destroyed because of the deeds of some other lost person are going to be judged at that great white throne judgment for what they did. For example, I told you last week, Mr. Kennedy, going all the way back, when he's the one who established the liquor and given the opportunity for liquor to be distributed all over our country. Every person who's ever become an alcoholic, a drunk, every home that's been destroyed, every life that's been destroyed, every person, anybody and everybody that the liquor has had an effect on for bad, Kennedy will stand at the great white throne judgment and be judged for every person and every wicked thing that he had ever done to that liquor. Now think about that for a moment. That's what God is trying to tell us. And I'm going to show you the scripture here in just a moment to kind of just emphasize what I'm talking about. But that's the liquor. You talk about these adult bookstores, or even the cell phones and the computers and all of the things that produce wicked, ungodly pornography. Yeah. Any young kid that's ever bought or had somebody, a dad or an aunt or an uncle or whatever, give them a magazine, the old Playboy magazines, and it's affected him, and he became obsessed with those kind of things. And then he passes it on to his friend, and his friend passes it on to his friend. How many people are going to be corrupted by one man exposing that kind of stuff to somebody else? And it goes on and on and on and on. So that's with liquor, that's with adult bookstores and adulteries that are How many divorces have been caused because of men being addicted to pornography? Somebody's going to pay for that. And the ones who are guilty that have distributed it to those by the thousands now from one person is going to stand at that great white throne judgment, and their degree of punishment is going to be according to all of those that they destroyed. We need to think about those kind of things. Let's take drugs. How many people are going to be, think about the cartels that are letting the drugs come in, and the people that are dying and being affected and out in the homeless, in the streets and living in tents and shooting themselves up and everything. How many people, how many children, how many wives have their husbands that have just absolutely become enslaved with drugs? And it goes on and on and on and on. They'll stand. God's got it written in his books. How many have been destroyed by the act of one person getting somebody else on drugs, and how that took a chain of events on other people. Drugs, broken homes, battered women, and of course the homeless, like I mentioned. Look at Matthew chapter 10 for a moment. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Go to Matthew chapter 10 and look at verse 14. Matthew chapter 10, verse number 14. This is how the Lord explains this kind of a reaction and what's going to take place. Matthew chapter 10, verse number 14. And it says this, and whosoever shall not receive you, nor, this he's talking to his disciples, and whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet. In other words, they went here, you tried to give them the gospel, you went house to house, door to door, you left the gospel tracts, and they wouldn't have anything to do with you giving out the gospel. They don't want anything to do with the gospel. Watch verse 15. Verily, that word verily means truly. Jesus is saying, truly, I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah. Why? Because they did not have the gospel given to them. They did not have somebody knocking on their door to tell them about Jesus or about God and how they could be saved. So it's going to be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah, who didn't receive the gospel, in the day of judgment than for that city who got the gospel and wouldn't receive it. You see how God is going to determine how much suffering is going to be going on? So it's more tolerable at the day of judgment. Now, if you notice with me, go to Matthew chapter 11, right across the page there, and look at verse number 21. Woe unto thee, Chorazin! Woe unto thee, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, you would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the day of judgment than for you. You had an opportunity. You didn't take the opportunity. You didn't want to listen to it. You didn't want to have any thought about it. And since it came to you and you would not, it's going to be more tolerable in the day of judgment than for Tyre and Sidon than for you. Now let's go to one more. Go to Matthew 23. Matthew chapter 23, verses 14 and 15. Let me show you. Matthew 23, verses 14 and 15. Now, I don't know of any other sin in the Bible that the Lord condemns than the sin that he mentions here, hypocrisy. God hates hypocrisy. In other words, not being real, not being genuine, not being true, but faking it. Look what he says here in verse 14. Woe, the word woe means cursed. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense, not genuine, pretense, make long prayer. Therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation. Pretending to be here, look who he's talking to here. He's talking to the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious people. And he calls them hypocrites. And he says, you are going to have the greater damnation because you're presenting yourself as religious, but you're a phony. You're wicked. Look at what else he says there in verse number 15. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye compass sea and land to make one proselyte. And when he's made, you make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. You pretended him to get into some religious, you acted like you were religious in front of him, and he's got into your religion, and look at the judgment you're going to get for that. Now notice the last part of verse 14 there. The greater damnation. God is saying the more you do unsaved in religious works, the hotter hell is going to be for you. I hate to say it, but I've been pastoring and preaching now for 60-some years, just over 60 years. And our congregations are filled with hypocrites. That's why you can only maybe get them on a Sunday morning to pretend like they're religious to everybody else, when they are themselves have never been born again and have a heart's desire to really serve God. They're hypocrites. You know what a hypocrite is? It's a stage actor. For example, take the person in Hollywood and he's making a film, maybe a Western. He's not a cowboy. He hardly even knows how to ride a horse. But he's pretending in that movie like he is a cowboy and he knows how to ride a horse. He's a pretender. He's a hypocrite. He's not really a cowboy, but he's pretending to be a cowboy. He's acting the part. How many? That's what God's trying to tell us here. That's what Christians do. They're not really Christians. They're not really born again. They're not really saved. They don't really live for Christ. But in other Christians and in church, they pretend like they are. They're stage actors. And that's going to be the greater judgment according to what God is saying here. He's saying, you preach to others as a religious person, but you're lost. So your hell's going to be hotter because you were lost when you pretended like you were a preacher. Or you taught a Sunday school class in the church, Grace Baptist Church. You taught a Sunday school class, but you were lost. Your hell's going to be hotter. Or maybe you sang in a choir, but you were lost. You sang those great praises to God and great hymns out of the book and everything, but you were lost. You're pretending that you really believe that particular song you're singing, but you were lost. How hot is your hell going to be? Same way with the deacon. Same way with the staff member. Same way with the faculty of the school or whatever. So who's he talking to? He's talking to those who make pretense. Who are they? He tells you they're hypocrites, they're stage actors, they're pretenders, they're not genuine, they're not real. And my goodness, does the Lord, if you'd read that whole passage he goes through, he calls them blind and he calls them fools and says greater is your damnation and so forth. He's trying to tell us the unsaved person is pretending that he's saved, he's acting and so forth. So he says he's saved, but he's not. He says he's a Christian, but he's not. So he's going to receive, according to the Bible, the greater damnation. A hypocrite's going to be judged and greater damnation than the reality of someone who's just lost. See, you thought that the people who would suffer most were people like Hitler. But Hitler didn't go to church. He didn't attend the Bible conferences. He didn't pass out gospel tracts. But people in our church sometimes do, and they're lost. Hypocrites. So degrees of punishment are determined by opportunities, hypocrisy, and dead works. Now let's go to Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20 and verse number 11. I don't intend to get done with all of this, by the way, but we'll go as far as we can until we have opportunity next Sunday. But look at Revelation chapter 20, and I want you to notice with me verse 11. Revelation 20 and verse number 11. Watch what it says here. Revelation 20 verse 11, and I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there's found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged. We're talking about the judgment now. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. You mean God keeps a record? Yeah, he's got probably a host of angels out there checking on everybody and writing down the works of every unsaved person. I mean, everything he does. Everything he says, everything he thinks. He's writing them down. They're in the books. And the books were open. They were judged out of the books. And it says in verse number 13, and the sea gave up the dead, which were in it. And death and hell delivered up the dead, which simply means those that die right now, they're in hell, but they haven't been judged for all of their wicked deeds yet because they haven't been to the great white throne judgment, which is going to take place. They're in hell right now, suffering in hell, but they're going to be judged for all their works when this time comes right here, which notice I'll show you when that comes. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Now, it talks about the other resurrection here. Let me see if I can. I thought we were close to it. Let me see if I can spot it right away. I think, yeah, it's verse number 6 of chapter number 20. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. That's the rapture. On such the second death hath no power. The one that we just read about for the unsaved. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Now notice, the ones that are going to hell was not raised at that first resurrection. They have a resurrection of the dead for this particular event called the Great White Throne Judgment. So, now we're talking about the dope pusher, the bootlegger, the flight attendant that sells liquor, and let me just spend a little time on that thought. And by the way, don't ask me to fill out a job reference for you. If you are ever going to apply for a job where there will be liquor peddled, I won't do it. And I have not done it, and I will not do it. I've had church members come to me and say that we can work at a certain, even grocery stores that sell liquor. I said, no, I won't do it. Woe unto the man that put the bottle to his neighbor's lips. That's in the Bible. So I'm not going to take part in the curse of the one that would sell liquor. So whether it be a restaurant, a convenience store, or whatever. Okay, I was raised Catholic, as you know. They believe there is a hell called purgatory. They believe their sins can be paid for by someone, and they can get out of hell by the payment that someone makes for them. But look at Matthew chapter 25 very quickly. Matthew 25. And look down at verse number 46. Matthew chapter 25 and verse number 46. And these shall go away unto everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. Now sometimes, or even most of the times, the words everlasting and eternal are different and mean differently in some cases. But in this verse, amazingly enough, the same Greek word is used, and both would mean the very same thing. That means the unsaved will be punished, according to verse 46, as long as I'm in heaven, they're going to be punished. As long as I'm eternally in heaven, they're going to be punished eternally. That's what that verse is saying. So there's no period of time where you will suffer and then have opportunity to get out. Everlasting punishment or everlasting life, one or the other, is going to take place. Does that mean those who live perfect and righteous lives? No. There's only one who ever lived a righteous, perfect life. His name was Jesus. So we must have his righteousness imputed to us. Yes. It's got to be. Yes, sir. Degrees in punishment are determined by opportunity, by hypocrisy, by works, and so forth. How long will this punishment last? According to the Bible, that punishment is going to last, and it's frightening to me, but it's going to last forever. That's why we've got to reach our loved ones and make sure. And you got to have your children to make sure they're saved. Yes, your aunts and your uncles, your moms and dads, your grandmas and grandpas. Because this is for eternity. It's forever. And the degrees of punishment can be awful. Now, let's look at the degrees of rewards. Go to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. We'll spend a little time on this morning as well, but I want you to get this. Matthew chapter 10, look at verse 41. Matthew 10, verse number 41. Watch this carefully, because I want you to get this. He that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. Notice the word reward. And he that receiveth a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whosoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water only in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. 3 times the Lord's using the word reward as he makes reference as to the judgment that's coming, and we'll receive our rewards. So now, are there degrees of rewards? According to this, yes. And other places we'll look. Now, what does it mean there in verse number 41, the first part, where it says in verse number 41, he that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward? What does that mean? That means if I come to your house as one of God's preachers, and you treat me properly, and have not got upset with the things that I preach to the point that you would treat me terribly. If you treat me properly, you'll receive a reward for that according to that Bible. It also means how you treat me as one of God's God-called preachers. I'm one of those prophets. I'm a preacher. What reward will you receive? The same reward I will receive for being a preacher. That's what it says in verse number 41. Look at it again. He that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. So whatever I get as being the prophet as a reward from God, if you treat the prophet of God the way he's supposed to be, with the right respect and honor toward him being a preacher, you receive the same reward that the prophet himself receives. Now let me go a little further here. Since I study, like I told you, I write everything down. So I wrote this down in my study, so I want to give you this. That is literally saying that the members of this church will receive the same reward their preacher, my son, Matthew Miller, will receive, based on how they do or do not receive him. That's what it says here. So what about all of these people all over the country who give their pastors trouble in their churches? What a shame that's going on in our fundamental independent Baptist churches, how they're treating their pastors because he's preaching the truth. That's what it says. So I'm talking about these big shots that are in the churches who think they know more about how to run a church than their pastor does. And everywhere I go, and I was preaching this last weekend up there in Montrose. But everywhere I go, I see these so-called, I'm not talking about that church there, I didn't see it necessarily there, but I have seen where this happens. And by the way, God is saying you will not receive rewards. God says they must receive the prophet. It doesn't say to receive a perfect prophet. It doesn't say to receive a great prophet. It doesn't say to save a prophet that I just like. No, it says a prophet. Anyone, any person that's a preacher, that's a prophet. It says a prophet. Now let me say this too. Young men that are called to preach, thank God that there are some, and I'm praying that more will be called to preach here in our own church. But young men that are called to preach, they need to understand something here. And that is, they too are in the making of being one of these prophets. And so they need to be practicing what they're going to be preaching. That means, folks, if you would be good to our preacher boys that are here, in fact, if you would help them, encourage them, receive them, clothe them, help them with whatever tuition they may have need of, you can have a part with their reward. In other words, whatever you do for them and they become successful, your success is being also founded by what success that you help them maintain. That's what that's saying. A man has a part. In fact, there was a man that has a part with mine. I got to tell you this. Remember when we had our missions conference here? I may have told you this already, but I didn't know everybody that was coming, and we were sitting down there at the lunch table downstairs and having lunch with all the different missionaries and pastors and people and so forth. And one of the guys called one of the men that was there, that was a pastor, by his last name, called him pastor and said his last name. And when he did, I thought, boy, that name sounds familiar. So afterwards, when I had time, I went over to that man with that last name, and I asked him. I said, where are you from? And he told me. I said, where's your father? He said, my father's a missionary in Alaska. I said, man, where did your father go to school, college? He said he went to Denver Baptist Bible College. I said, that's where I went. I know your dad. And you know what I found out? For 4 years when I went to Bible college, let me just back up just a little bit. My first semester, they had a policy that your tuition bill had to be paid in full before you could take your final test. I went through that whole semester, and we were so broke. I couldn't come up with funds to be able to pay for my tuition, and so I would have taken that whole semester in vain. I would not have been able to take the test. So I went to the president, because I knew him, and I asked him if there's some way I could make payments on it. He said, no. He said, if I do that for you, I'd have to do that for others. And so, no, we have a policy. We have to stick by it. I said, well, I've gone through the whole semester, and I can't take my finals. He said, I'll pray with you about that, Brother Miller. And he did. He says, you got 2 weeks. He said, maybe between now and 2 weeks, the Lord will supply. I said, okay. So the next week, the Lord didn't supply. And now we're only a week away from the finals. So I went back into him. I said, Brother Augsburger, I said, is there not any way at all that I can do this? I said, I hate wasting this whole semester and not be able to take my final exams. He said, I'm sorry, Brother Miller. He said, I'm sorry. So that week went, and we came up to the day of the final test. And I went back into him, and I said, Brother Augsburger, I tried to get some money. I tried to borrow some. I tried to work extra job, but I didn't get it. But I said, I'll start the next semester, even though I can't take the test. And here's what he said. He said, Brother Miller, have you checked your mailbox there in the college? I said, no. He said, go take a look in your mailbox and come back and see me. I went and looked in my mailbox, a little slip of paper, which was a receipt, and said, tuition paid in full. But it didn't say, all it said was, the donor wants to remain anonymous. Every single solitary semester for those 4 years I went to college, I got that same receipt, tuition paid in full. The man whose name I heard was his dad that paid my tuition for those 4 years. So here I am, a preacher. I wonder how much of a reward. Everything that I have ever seen in my ministry, all the souls that were saved and all the blessings that have come, he gets as much as I do. That's what that verse is saying. That's what he's saying. So we better take real interest in our pastor. And I got the note, and since he's not here, that next week, which is our 48th anniversary, I got the note that came in on email or something like that we want to give a special gift to our pastor to celebrate that special day. And I will, even though I'm his dad, I'm going to do everything I can. I've tried to honor him, and boy, we had such a wonderful time together up there at that camp out, he and I, and his 4 generations. I was there. My son Matthew was there. His son Dace was there, and Dace's, my great-grandson Stetson was there, and we got a picture of the 4 generations there at that lake. But I want to get that prophet's reward. But I want others to get it, and the reason why I'm saying that to you, whatever you can do for your pastor, whatever you can do for him, and I'm not talking about material gifts, just praise, loyalty. I'm not talking about you reaching in your pocket and giving something. That'd be good if anybody did, but I'm not saying that at all. But if you want to receive a reward, take good care of your pastor and encourage him and pray for him and praise him and thank God for him. Amen?